If you're competent and still underpaid, I want you to know this. It's not because your work isn't good enough. It's because you're being paid for the wrong thing. And until you understand what that thing actually is, the conversation never changes. Now, most people in this situation assume they need to work harder, make a better case, or even wait longer. But none of those fix the actual problem, because the actual problem isn't performance. It's what the organisation has decided you're worth and why. Now, here's the assumption most skilled professionals operate under. If I do excellent work consistently over time, the organisation will recognise that and compensate me accordingly. And you know, it's a reasonable assumption. It's also almost entirely wrong. Now, it's not because organisations are indifferent to quality, but because organisations don't pay for past performance. They actually pay for future utility. And those are different calculations. And if you're optimising for the wrong one, you'll keep getting the wrong result regardless of how good your work actually is. Now, here's the first pattern, and it involves a specific kind of professional who does excellent work and receives almost no recognition for it. Now, it's not because the work isn't good. It's because it's happening in the wrong room. And I've watched people spend years producing genuinely strong output, analytical work, technical work, strategic work that never reach the level where compensation decisions are made. Their manager knew, their immediate team knew, the people who decide who gets promoted and what they get paid had no idea this person existed. And proximity to decision makers is not vanity, it's infrastructure. Now, the work that gets rewarded is almost never the best work in the building. It's the work that's most visible to the people who control the budget. And visibility is not accidental. It's simply a decision about where you spend your time and who you spend it with. Now, the person doing excellent work in a silo, heads down, delivering consistently, trusting that quality will eventually be noticed, is optimizing for recognition from the wrong audience. And it's the organisation isn't ignoring them, it genuinely doesn't know they're there. Now, in judo, there's a concept called sakuri, positioning before the throw. The throw itself takes a fraction of a second. The positioning that makes it possible takes the entire match. Now, compensation works identically. The conversation that changes your pay happens in minutes, but the positioning that makes it possible takes months. So I want you to remember this. Excellent work in the wrong room produces excellent obscurity. Now, the second pattern is subtler and considerably more expensive over time. The person who becomes exceptionally good at one specific thing, not generally skilled, not broadly capable, genuinely expert in a narrow area that the organisation values highly. Now, this looks like an advantage, and for a while it is, but then it becomes a constraint because deep specialisation inside a single organisation creates a very specific problem. The skill becomes inseparable from the context. The expertise is real, but it's calibrated to this system, these tools, these stakeholders, these problems. Now, when you try to price it externally, the market is going to give you a number that doesn't reflect what you know you're capable of. The specialist has built genuine depth, and they've built it in a way that doesn't travel cleanly, which means the only buyer for their skills at full value is the organisation they're already in. And an organisation that knows it's your only realistic buyer has very little incentive to pay market rate. Now, in judo, a specialist is someone who only knows one technique, and that becomes predictable. And any opponent who has studied you for 2 minutes knows exactly what's coming. Now, the solution isn't to abandon the technique, it's to build enough range that the specialist technique becomes a choice and not a compulsion. Now, portable skills give you that range professionally. So I want you to remember this. Depth without portability is expertise that only one buyer can afford. Now, the third pattern is the one most people have never consciously examined. And most professionals have spent their entire career treating their current employer as the primary reference point for what they're worth. The salary they received when they joined, the incremental increases since, the band their role sits in. And these numbers feel real because they're concrete and immediate, but they're not an accurate reflection of market value. They're an accurate reflection of what one organisation decided to pay at a specific moment in time, often years ago, under conditions that no longer apply. But market value is what a different organisation would pay for the same skills today. And most professionals have no idea what that number is. Not approximately, not roughly, actually no idea at all, because they've never tested it. They've never had a serious conversation with a competing employer, never run a proper external process, never created the conditions where market value becomes a concrete number rather than a vague suspicion that they might be worth more. Which means when they sit down to negotiate compensation, they're doing it without the single most important piece of information in the conversation, what someone else would actually pay. Now, in competition, you never walk onto the mat without understanding the field. Who else competed today, what they scored, what the standard actually is. And going into a compensation conversation without external market data is the equivalent of competing blind. You feel the result without understanding it. So please remember this, you cannot negotiate from market value you have never actually established. Now, there's 3 patterns here and 3 different problems and one shared cause, right? Each one is a version of the same mistake, operating inside the organization's frame of reference rather than building an independent one. Now, the person with the visibility gap is letting the organization decide who matters. The person in the specialisation trap is letting the organisation define what their skills are worth. And the person with the internal market problem is letting the organisation set the price. And in all 3 cases, the professional has handed the organisation something it should never have been given, the ability to define the terms. And as we know, most organisations are not meritocracies. They are allocation systems. They reward what looks scarce and costly to lose, not what is most capable. And the moment you allow the organisation to be the sole judge of your value, you have already lost the negotiation. And it's not because the organisation is dishonest, because it's rational. So what actually changes? Not the quality of the work, that's already there. Visibility, built deliberately at the level where decisions are made, not just where the work is delivered. Portability, skills developed alongside institutional expertise so the value exists outside the organisation as well as inside it. And external reference points. A genuine understanding of what the market would pay, created through actual conversations and not assumptions. And none of this requires aggression. None of it requires an ultimatum. It requires operating with a frame of reference the organisation doesn't control. And that single shift changes the nature of every compensation conversation you will ever have. So competent people stay underpaid for one reason. They optimise for the organisation's stated values. And these are usually quality, reliability, commitment, loyalty. And yes, these are real values. They're just not the ones that move compensation. The ones that move compensation are scarcity, visibility, and the credible possibility of loss. Now, if you build those and the conversation changes, right? And it's not because the organisation becomes fair, because you stop asking for it to be.